with a history that is as dramatic as the Tower of London, spanning nearly 1,000 years, it's not surprising that there are some ghost stories that come from there. Here are just two of them. The White Tower is the oldest and most forbidding of all the tower's buildings, and its winding stone corridors are the eerie haunt of a white lady who once stood at the window waving to a group of children in the building opposite. It may well be her cheap perfume which impregnates the air around the entrance to St John's Chapel. The Bloody Tower is also home to the most poignant shades that drift through this dreadful fortress. When Edward IV died suddenly in April 1483, his 12-year-old son was destined to succeed him as Edward V. However, the boy's coronation could take place. Both he and his younger brother, Richard, were declared illegitimate by Parliament. Their uncle, the Duke of Gloucester, ascended the throne as Richard III. The boys, meanwhile, had been sent to the Tower of London, ostensibly in preparation for Edward's coronation, but in about June 1483, they mysteriously vanished and were never seen alive again. Many believed that they had been murdered on Richard's instructions and that their bodies were buried somewhere within the grounds of the tower. When two skeletons were uncovered beneath the staircase of the White Tower in 1674, they were presumed to be the remains of the two princes and were afforded a royal burial at Westminster Abbey. Since then, the whimpering wraiths of the two children, dressed in white nightgowns and clutching each other in terror, have frequently been seen in the dimly lit rooms of their imprisonment. On 2nd November 1811, Philip Whitehead, who had been employed in the cashier's office at the Bank of England, was brought to the dock of the Old Bailey and charged with forgery. Found guilty, he was sentenced to death and was duly hanged in early 1812. However, the news of his crime and execution was kept from his devoted sister, Sarah. She was removed by Philip's friends to a house in Wine Office Court. One day, Sarah turned up at the bank to inquire about her brother's whereabouts, and an unthinking clerk told her what had happened. The shock of the discovery made her lose her mind, and thereafter she turned up to the bank daily to ask after her brother. She became known as the Bank Nun on account of her peculiar attire, which consisted of a long black dress and crepe veil. Convinced that the bank's governors were keeping an immense fortune from her, Sarah accused them of defrauding her. By 1818, the bank's governors had grown sufficiently tired of her daily disturbances, so gave her a sum of money on the condition that she would never return to the bank again. In life, Sarah honoured that contract, but in death her wraith has broken it many times. More than one late-night wanderer, wending his or her weary way home along Threadneedle Street, has been surprised by her ghostly figure. The Viaduct Tavern stands opposite the Central Criminal Courts, or popularly known as the Old Bailey, after the road in which they stand. The pub dates from 1875 and is the last example of a late Victorian gin palace left in the City of London. It is also prone to bouts of poltergeist activity. The restless spirit that haunts the Viaduct Tavern has a propensity to haunt the pub cellars, and several members of staff have experienced its unwelcome attentions. One Saturday morning in 1996, a manager was tidying the cellar when the door suddenly slammed shut and the lights went out. Feeling his way to the door, he discovered that, no matter how hard he pushed, it would not open. His wife heard his cries for help and came downstairs to investigate. She found that the doors, which would not open from the inside, were unlocked and easily opened from the outside. In May 1999, two electricians were working in one of the pub's upstairs rooms when one of them felt a tap on their shoulder. Thinking it was his workmate, he turned round but found that he was on the other side of the room. He asked him if he was playing a prank, but the man denied any involvement. As he was about to return to his chores, both men watched as the heavy carpet, which lay rolled up in the window, was lifted into the air and then dropped. The Viaduct Tavern also sits opposite the old Newgate prison, which was notorious in the days for being particularly cruel. There is rumoured to be cells that still exist under the Viaduct Tavern. Number 33, Cock Lane, was demolished long ago, but in the late 18th century, one of London's most infamous hauntings occurred at what was then the home of a clerk called William Parsons. One morning in 1760, Parsons offered lodgings to a widower called William Kent. He gratefully accepted and moved into the house with his sister-in-law, Miss Fanny, with whom he had become romantically involved. Not long after the lovers had taken up residence, Parsons borrowed a large sum of money from Kent, but showed a marked reluctance to repay. Relations had become strained between the two men when Kent was suddenly called away on business. Rather than sleep alone while her lover was away, Miss Fanny took Parsons' 11-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, to bed with her. In the early hours of the morning, they were woken by a mysterious scratching sound from behind the wainscoting. Fanny convinced herself it was the spirit of her dead sister, warning her of her own imminent demise. When Kent returned, he found his mistress on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and he deemed it best that they move out of the lodgings. However, soon after they found a new home, Fanny actually died of smallpox. When Kent pressed Parsons for repayment of the loan, his former landlord claimed that the scratching noises had resumed in his house, and that they were the spirit of Miss Fanny, and that she had informed him that William Kent had actually murdered her. A local clergyman decided that an investigation into the allegations should be carried out, and the ghost proved more than willing to oblige. The wraith informed him through Parsons that if he spent a night by Miss Fanny's resting place in St. John's Church, then she would answer any questions by knocking on the lid of her coffin. And so it was that the vicar, accompanied by a group of fearless companions, traipsed down into the church vault at 1 a.m. that morning. When nothing had occurred by dawn, the ghost was declared a fraud. However, a secret watch had been kept on Elizabeth, who was observed hiding a small wooden board beneath her stays, and the trick was exposed. Parsons spent 2 years in the King's Bench prison. Elizabeth was exonerated of any crime, as it was deemed that she had been an unwitting accomplice, and William Kent's name was cleared. The ghost was consigned to the pages of history as Scratching Fanny of Cock Lane.